Dear viewers, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh. First of all, I would like to welcome all of you to the third webinar held by the Emirates Policy Center, EPC in Abu Dhabi, to foresee the ramification of the coronavirus crisis regionally and globally. I would like also to draw your attention that we have for those I will switch in Arabic now. للإخوة المتابعين بالعرب هناك في أسفل الشاشة لوجو يشير إلى الكرة الأرضية ومكتوب عليه interpretation أي ترجمة. تستطيعون الضغط عليه واختيار فرنش ستحيلكم إلى اللغة العربية حيث ستستمعون إلى ترجمة الندوة باللغة العربية. The first webinar discussed potential global geostrategic shifts in the coronavirus crisis, while the second addressed potential post-coronavirus geopolitical shifts in the MENA region. This webinar, however, discussed potential post-coronavirus geo-economic shifts. We are pleased to have with us in this symposium Giacomo Luciani, adjunct professor at Graduate Institute of International and Development Studies in Geneva, and renowned expert in Middle East economics and global energy. And we are also pleased to have with us Dr. Ibrahim Saif, the CEO of Jordan Strategy Forum and former Minister of both Planning and International Cooperation and Energy. And last but not least, our friend Dr. Hani Findaqli, Vice Chairman of the Clinton Group, Inc. in New York, and international expert in investment and development. On behalf of all of you, I would like to thank our speakers for today for accepting our invitation to participate in this event. The novel COVID-19 crisis has not only hit hard the health system of 4 countries or caused big human losses, as reported cases of the pandemic worldwide have reached 4 million, with more than 250,000 deaths early May 2020. But obviously, its impact has also spread to global economies. Many world countries have already experienced a drop in GDP, a decline in economic growth, and damage in various sectors, thereby resulting in bankruptcy of companies, mass layoffs, and soaring rates of poverty and disease. Despite inconsistent expectations about the future of a global economy due to the coronavirus crisis, which ranged between Great Depression to robust economic takeoff scenarios, this crisis will undoubtedly have deep impact on the global economic system and the balance of economic power globally and regionally. Undoubtedly, there is a global uncertainty over potential post-coronavirus geo-economic shifts. Therefore, this webinar comes as an attempt by Emirates Policy Center to resolve the uncertainty through discussing and trying to find answers to some key questions in this regard with the help of examined experts in political economy. I would like to welcome you all again and wish all viewers of this live stream sessions on EPC account on all various social media platforms and the Center's YouTube channel fruitful and beneficial discussion. Now I would like to give the floor to our speakers and to start with Professor Giacomo Luciani to give us his thoughts in from 3 to 4 minutes, and then we will go to Q&A. Thank you very much. Please, Professor Luciani.
Thank you, Dr. Ibtisam. Thank you for inviting me. It's my pleasure to be addressing this virtual audience and be available for the Emirates Policy Center. Well, I think the key point is that we are facing a very deep recession, something which is unusual, a recession which is unusual in its causes and difficult to predict in its development. All forecasts, all figures that we read point to a recession which is of the same magnitude as the Great Depression of the end of 1920s. And that, of course, is very worrisome. So what worries me most is that we will come out of this recession. We will come out, even if we solve the problem of the virus and we start going back to normal life, this experience will have left everybody with serious financial consequences. In other words, all the households, the corporations, the governments will come out of this experience with a lot of additional debt and very fragile finances. And how this can be dealt with is difficult to envisage. There is going to be lots of bankruptcies, small and large, inevitably, even if governments come to support the productive sector. And this will lead to potential litigation and long queue of consequences along the time. There are some sectors that have been especially hit. Everything that is related with mobility, so the automobile industry, aviation, everything related with tourism, hospitality, all of these sectors have been severely hit and they will have to be reorganized. So this is difficult to envisage. And it reflects on energy and energy demand. Energy demand is very closely related to the aggregate demand and to the well-being of the economy. So I am afraid that we will have low energy demand for several months. Some people envisage that the situation might be back into equilibrium already at the end of this year, but it's difficult for me to envisage that. And I think this will lead to very low prices for all energy sources and manifestations. So not just oil. We know that the price of gas these days is extremely low. The price of natural gas on the national balancing point in the UK is lower than Henry Hub in the United States, something which we have never seen before. And the price of coal has collapsed. The price of electricity is declining. So it's really something that has affected the whole energy sector and will cause consequences for quite a long time.
Thank you, Professor Luciani. Dr. Saif, what do you think?
Thank you, Dr. Ibtisam, for this invitation, and I hope everybody will remain safe and during this difficult time. I cannot also start my observation without referring to Professor Luciani, whom when I start reading about the political economy of the region, that I start reading his stuff. So I'm really humbled to be with you this evening. What I want to say is that there are a couple of things that I think I'll present, probably they are not as structured, but I think there are some serious implications of COVID. Economically, as it's been said, it's devastating, and by different and variant degrees, every country is being affected, negatively affected by this. And if you take it down at a sectoral level, of course, also the sectoral impact would be varied. There are some sectors that have also probably made some gain out of this in agricultural or pharmaceutical or some the personal safety equipment or whatever measures it takes. However, overall, there is now a global recession. And the question is not whether we have a recession or not. The question is what is the magnitude and what is the how much contraction we are going to witness during the remaining of 2020 and probably early 21 until this issue is vaccinated, the health issue is being sorted out. And what I witnessed, some observations that I would like to throw, and maybe that will take us also throughout the discussion. All of a sudden, we have the government back at the center of everything. The government is controlling every single details of our lives, and surprisingly, people accepting that role because it is serving the people. And that kind of normal political rivalness and competition, it's not there. So that's one of the things that I think worth focusing on, and whether that would be acceptable for in the long run, and whether the government also performing as well during this difficult time, and whether they're having the right tools to address and to tackle the issues that we're having in hand. Second, there is now a rethinking of what is the terms of globalization, or openness in terms of trade, and openness in terms of markets, and whether this balance of power after this COVID-19 and the balance of power, I mean globally, China, the US, the EU, the emerging markets, whether that would be, again, the balance would be the same, or we are going to witness an emerging powers in the region. I think there is a shift, a serious shift that is taking place, that is also, it's worth that we have to consider in that regard. Also, everything related to technology, knowledge, software development is taking the lead now, and some of these sectors also came as winners in this COVID-19, and they're establishing new trends in how we conduct business, how we handle health, how do we education, and other related issues. Whether that is going to stay with us after we find hopefully a vaccination for COVID-19, or that is going to be changed after that, and whether what we're witnessing in terms of behavior, and that takes me to the fourth trend that I'm talking about, whether our individual behavior or societal behavior or investor behavior, which is being severely affected by what is happening now, whether we are going to witness also a shift in terms of priorities, in terms of how we look at things after we overcome the COVID-19, or would it be the same issue as we go along? That's also warranty some further discussion, because I believe that there is a deep change that is slowly taking place in the way we behave and the way we perceive things, that would probably influence a lot of the business models that are being conducted in that regard. Professor Luciani has alluded to the energy related issue, which I think also, I think there is also a deep change in the way we approach energy, and maybe throughout the discussion we can say that whether this trend is going to stay with us. But with this, like 4 or 5, what I refer to as deep changes that is taking place, I leave you, Ibtisam, with this, and hopefully that we can discuss it further throughout. Thank you very much.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Ibrahim. Dr. Hani, please.
Thank you very much, Ibtisam, and first, happy Ramadan to everybody who's listening here, and I hope that you and your families are safe and clustered at home. And thank you, Ibtisam, for organizing this. It is a sense of leadership, of taking the initiative to put us all together. I'm glad to be on the panel with these two illustrious speakers, and as a famous senator used to say, that everything that needed to be said about this crisis has been said, but not everybody has said it. So I'm going to try to put some bones, some flesh on the bones of the items and the elements that have already been identified by Professor Luciani and Dr. Ibrahim. The words that describe and refer to this crisis have been nothing but out of proportion to what we have experienced in normal economic setbacks. Shock, catastrophe, unprecedented, depression, deep contraction are just examples of the kind of words that describe that. So it's a little too early to define the post-coronavirus world, but there are elements out there that point to some direction that allows us to make some guesses about where we're headed, and some of it was alluded to by Professor Luciani and by Dr. Ibrahim. But let me put some flesh on the bones. U.S. unemployment rate reported last month that the United States economy lost 20.5 million jobs. And since the survey was conducted in March, there were an additional 30 million job losses, applications for unemployment insurance. So that's a total of 33 million jobs lost. To give you a sense of what that means, as of December 31, 2019, there were 164 million people in the US labor force. So 33 million is roughly about 20%. And the estimates is that this could easily get back to 25 or even as high as 30%. And to put that in perspective, at the height of the Depression in 1932-33, unemployment rate reached exactly 24.9%. So we are at or above that level, or will be very soon. Projections for US, European, and Japanese economies are somewhere in the range of 8% to 15%, which collectively means about a loss of about $10 trillion in global economic picture. The total global economy as of last year was about $86 trillion. So we could be losing about 10 to 15% of that in 2020. This gives us a little bit of a sense of where we're headed. Governments have responded to this in a very dramatic way. All that it takes. Basically, that was the attitude of US Congress. That was the attitude of Europeans. That was the attitude of the Japanese. And to a slightly lesser extent, but equally important, the attitude of China and some of the major other emerging economies. The UN estimates that about 2.7 billion people have been distressed worldwide. The ILO estimates somewhere in the range of about 200 million jobs that have already been lost, and estimates that probably as many as twice that number could end up at the end of 2020. U.S. Congress has allocated $3.5 trillion, trillion with a T, as a way to cushion the blow on individual companies and on individuals themselves. And on top of that, about $6 trillion in liquidity was pumped by the Federal Reserve. That total is about 45% of the entire US GDP. World Bank and the IMF have allocated as much as $1 trillion of emergency liquidity. To give you a sense of how that package was put together, it was put together within 2 weeks. 106 countries applied for that emergency loan, and the IMF, uncharacteristically, decided to process these loans quickly and to disperse it without a single condition. To give you a sense of how they see these things as urgent and as necessary. Missing in this whole picture is what I think is the harbinger of things to come, and that is a coordination, international coordination, especially at the level of the big powers. US, China refused during the G20 meeting to endorse some of the key recommendations that the IMF and the World Bank, and supported by European countries, of debt relief and debt restructuring, obviously for reasons of their own. So looking ahead, I see a number of elements. Too early to tell how the world is coming, but some of these elements are beginning to become apparent, and they were alluded to by the previous speakers. First, however and how quickly we deal with the COVID-19 issue and whether an effective vaccine will be forthcoming now or within the 12 to 18-month period, the world is going to emerge poorer and saddled with a huge amount of debt, and will be facing a protracted period, and I don't know whether that's 5 years or 2 years or 7 years, of a very low growth. Second is that for economic reasons and other reasons, nationalism and localization of industries and declining productivity and efficiency globally will be the rule of the day. Every crisis brings out fissures and exposes the weaknesses that countries have. And we have determined for a number of reasons the weaknesses that have been obvious for a long time, and that is the long supply chain that globalization brought about. So a process of reversing that, where for nationalistic or other practical reasons, a number of countries will choose to bring its industries home and to reduce the disruptions in supply chain. The U.S. is known. So this one final point on this. The U.S. is known to have had all sort of issues related to bungling of dealing with the crisis. They find out that 97% of all pharmaceutical and medical equipment is imported from China. So a reversal of that process is very highly likely to take place. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Hani. Thank you. I would like to now start with the Q&A, but before that I will switch to Arabic. الإخوة المتابعين باللغة من الأخوة العرب، هناك ترجمة لهذه الندوة. في أسفل الشاشة تجدون لوجو أو رمز يشير إلى الكرة الأرضية ومكتوب عليه interpretation باللغة الإنجليزية. عندما تضغطون عليه ستجدون خيارين، الفرنسية والإنجليزية. من يرغب في الاستماع إلى الندوة باللغة العربية فليضغط على الفرنسية لكي يستمع إلى الندوة باللغة العربية. Now I'm going to start the Q&A, and I will start with Professor Luciani. Giacomo, what is the impact of coronavirus crisis on redefining the concept of conflict as well as that of cooperation, competition between states? And are we going to see a new set of cooperation and economic integration agreements between states, or the return of state to protectionism and isolationism? Please, Jacob.
Yes, I believe, first of all, we should say isolationism is not an option for anybody. So we have to maintain things into certain, reasonable boundaries. A policy of complete isolationism is not even good for North Korea. So I don't think it's an option. That said, it is true, as Dr. Hani was just saying, that countries will be increasingly concerned about their dependence on very long added value chains in the possibility that they are confronted with situations in which certain key intermediate products are not available. So yes, there will be a rethinking of globalization. I think the heydays of globalizations are pretty much finished. People appreciate globalization, but now we'll take it critically. Okay, so there will be a selection process of certain areas in which we are happy to be globalized, and other areas in which we will make sure that we are not too much dependent. Especially, I think there is very deep down a feeling that some countries have profited from globalization and behaved, let's put it this way, in a less than gentlemanly fashion. Okay, so you know, non-respect of intellectual private property, you know, even a certain way of separating trade from other values that is not acceptable any longer. So, you know, if you are a country that behaves aggressively internationally, if you are a country that does not do enough to protect the environment, if you are a country that does not do enough for protecting basic human rights and so on and so forth, there will be some pushback on the part of the major industrial countries, because people have had enough of some behavior. So that has to be taken into account. Cooperation has been challenged in this occasion. Even within the European Union, it has been very clear at the beginning that there was not enough cooperation, not enough solidarity. I am optimistic about the European Union because, you know, now that Brexit is done, and I think the Brits will regret it, but you know, we'll see. The rest of the union has reacted to the initial lack of cooperation, and now is moving, I believe, decisively towards a new level of more intense cooperation. This is difficult to agree upon, of course, but it is clear that this is coming. Elsewhere in the world, I am concerned by the weakness of other regional cooperation schemes, which are leaving countries with not enough potential for regional cooperation. And notably, you know, I am concerned about the situation in the region, because I see in the past few years, in the past 10 years, let's say, a multiplication of conflicts that are not resolved, a lack of readiness to compromise, a willingness to engage in you know, conflict rather than maintaining the benefits of cooperation, which had started in the past. And this needs to be reversed, because you know, a region that is perennially in conflict will inevitably suffer in the context of a revision of globalization.
Thank you, Dr. Luciani. Dr. Saif, what are the prospects of economic constructing due to the coronavirus crisis? And what are the economic sectors that are most affected or hit by the current crisis?
Thanks again, Ibtisam. I think, yes, we are talking about, in our introductory remarks, about the challenges and the negative adverse outcome of COVID-19 and what came out of this. But yes, are there opportunities somewhere lies beneath this crisis that after the dust clears that we can see something in the horizon? I think the question is yes. The question is, I think, is we have to go through a transition. This transition, I think, was going to take place anyway, driven by technology, driven by some circumstances that was taking shape on the ground. However, COVID either another huge disruptive incident that either would expedite or would speed up the process of disappearing activities or disappearing some functions that was until recently normal. But now, clearly that, just take an example, just to education. Education, as we know it, all of us went to these universities, schools, and there is that classroom, and there is just that traditional way of learning and gaining education and gaining social skills, etc. COVID has expedited the process of going into e-learning, and if I am not mistaken, I think in Emirates they adopted like a white paper on what comes next when it comes to distance learning or distance learning. You can move on and talk about IT-based industries, health and telehealth activities that could also take place in that regard. So these are on the winning sides. Any IT-based activities potentially could be on the winning side if they manage to make the transition in the right fashion and at the right time. However, take sectors like tourism, hospitality, and other, and some form of industries and services that definitely will take probably not the V shape or the U shape in terms of recovery, but probably the L shape, that it will take a while before we can see these sectors recover and getting back. But speaking of on the region in this regard, is that clearly, although I agree with that globalization heydays probably are over, however, also what this crisis has taught us is that countries alone cannot also withstand this crisis. Countries alone cannot face such an epidemic or such really an accelerated path of this dual shock on the supply and the demand side. And the only way out, I can see it for many countries, is that a form of new regional cooperation has to take place, a form that is departing from the traditional way of us signing this bilateral trade and reversing and hoping and that trades and kind of a better form of deeper integration would take place. Now we can talk about mutually beneficial kind of integration that is driven by necessity, by the way, and not necessarily by emotion or by our desire and willingness to do it, but because it's important, we need to collaborate and we need to find and to devise a new formula whereby regional integration can take different forms in order for us to survive. And finally, I talk about the new role that the government is gaining globally and in the region. And this is probably where I hope we can elaborate a little bit in the new dynamics between the stakeholders. But definitely there are winners and losers, and there is a need for a new forms of regional cooperation for us to overcome the challenges that we are facing.
We hope so. Dr. Hani, who will be the winners and losers during and after coronavirus crisis? Are we going to witness a high-intensity trade war between the US and China?
Uh, I don't see any winners in the crisis itself and in the post-crisis. What I do see is a relative loser, a smaller loser, and a bigger loser. Obviously, things could change quite a bit. We could develop a vaccine and life could go back to normal, but that's a lot more wishful thinking than it is anything else. The fissures what we have found in the global economy and industrial economies and in the developing economy are likely to persist and deepen the divide between poor and rich, both within societies and among different countries. We see, for example, the impact of the coronavirus in terms of death and health and infection to be much higher among the lower end of society in every country, and particularly in the advanced countries. We see, for example, that certain countries are more exposed than others, and especially if we look forward into the economy. We've already seen the collapse of energy prices, which we know a lot about. There's less written about the collapse of other commodity prices in general. So if you take developing countries as a whole, they are going to be the biggest losers. Why are they going to be the bigger losers? They are going to be bigger losers because many of them are exporters and producers of commodities. Many of them are manufacturers and exporters of low-end products for which demand will be declining. Many of those countries that rely on tourism as a source of foreign exchange earnings and employment. Many of them rely on foreign direct investment as a way to improve and create jobs and develop their infrastructure. And many of them rely on workers' remittances, which add up globally to about $600 billion per year in many countries, especially ones in our region, Egypt being an example, Morocco and others, who will be suffering quite a bit from that. So collectively, developing countries have a number of limitations. I've already mentioned some of those, but I will add a couple more. One is that they have huge amount of indebtedness, and most of their indebtedness is to their to foreign investors and foreign lenders, and that is mostly in dollars or foreign currency, whose earnings are going to be far more scarce and far more limited. In the region, the country, and we saw that, for example, Saudi Arabia being a classic example. Yesterday, the Ministry of Finance announced some very dramatic measures to cut spending, to reduce jobs, to stop payments, to cancel projects, things of that type, and to raise taxes by 15%. It goes against economic orthodoxy to raise taxes and cut spending at a time when your economy is struggling. So Saudi Arabia, for example, and maybe probably some other Gulf countries will be doing exactly the opposite of what the US and other advanced European, Japanese, and China is doing. And why is that? And the reason is fairly simple, that I have been arguing in forums at EPC and elsewhere for the last 10 years that those governments are restrained and constrained from having any flexibility on the management of their economy because they have tied their local currency to the US dollar. So the United States could print as much money as it wishes, but Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, Oman, Bahrain, and a number of those countries do not have that flexibility because their currency is tied to the dollar, and therefore their spending, their monetary policy and their fiscal policy is completely a hostage to their peg to the US dollar. So collectively, those countries are going to be struggling and suffering, and there is no stimulus that they have an ability to implement short of some miraculous recovery in oil prices or energy prices or some other things. So they are likely to be potentially big losers, not only in the very short term, meaning this year or maybe next year, but potentially into the medium and longer term.
Hani, what about the trade war between the US and China?
Okay, so I have argued that as part of this whole experience that we had, the United States discovered its vulnerability to imports from outside, and particularly its dependence on China. As you all know, the U.S. has been in some form of a trade war of types with China over the course of the last 3 or 4 years, particularly with this new administration, who has a completely distorted view of what tariffs do to the economy. People forget that one of the contributors to the Great Depression in 1929 was the Smoot-Hawley Act, which is the the application of tariffs on foreign imports. We seem to be repeating that. But there's such a sense of nationalism and sense of unity among different political persuasions in the United States, whether it's Democrats, Republicans, liberals, and otherwise, with few small exceptions of intellectuals like myself who believe that a conflict with China is likely to be damaging both countries and maybe global trade. So personally, I think the crisis itself has brought down and will be bringing down global trade, which has been coming down quite a bit, and Professor Luciano made a reference to that. So I expect quite a bit of a decline in world trade that is going to be driven by 2 or 3 factors, technology being one of them. 3-dimensional printing and similar kind of technologies are likely to localize production. But quite a bit of that is also going to be driven, what I think is a slightly medium to long-term trend that is we're beginning to see in the US and in the West, and probably will accelerate, and that is a reduction in consumption, in unnecessary consumption. The US economy last year had 72% component in consumption, basically people buying everything. This crisis has taught people that they need to save and they need to be cautious. 40% of the American people that were surveyed last year showed that they did not have emergency savings to meet a $400 emergency, medical or otherwise, that they have. So that is going to bring down consumption quite a bit, and with it, obviously, global trade.
Thank you, Hani. Giacomo, how would the coronavirus crisis reflect on the dealing of major and regional powers with gas discoveries in the Eastern Mediterranean, and how would this affect changing or amending the rules of the international game?
Yes, Ibtisam, the discoveries of gas in the Eastern Mediterranean are interesting, but it is my impression that their importance should not be exaggerated for several reasons. The most obvious reason is that today the prices of gas are so low that there is no way that you can make money out of producing gas in the Eastern Mediterranean. Okay, the situation may be exceptional at the moment, but the fact is that we have a price of gas below $2 per million BTU in the national balancing point in the UK. Any transport of gas from the Eastern Mediterranean to European destinations would cost at least $2. Okay, so I mean, but that's if you find a way to build a very cheap pipeline, which I don't see because it's a difficult proposition. It's a pipeline under the sea and so on and so forth. If you go by way of LNG, the liquefaction process adds at least $3–3.50 to the cost of gas. So even if you pay this gas zero, and there is no company that will produce the gas for zero, it will not be able to enter in the European market. Russia has made clear that they intend to compete and maintain market share. Maybe this is not the best strategy for them, but that's the strategy that they have chosen. So at the moment, I don't see much of a prospect. There are numerous other interesting projects for gas in the world, in Africa especially. You know, there is more gas in Nigeria, there is gas in Senegal, there is gas in Mozambique and Tanzania. There are plenty of projects. So I think that the time for gas in the Eastern Mediterranean has already passed. When gas was first discovered in Cyprus, you know, had they been pragmatic, they would have sold the gas to Turkish Cyprus, to the northern part of the island, and to Turkey. Turkey is a good market for them. But because of political conditions and the conflict that there is between Cyprus and Turkey, this, which would be the obvious destination for that gas, has been rejected always. Each time I speak to my Cypriot friends and I tell them this is what you should do, they flip out. And okay, I'm sorry, but that's the only thing you can do with that gas. and you have to accept reality for what it is. The alternative is to keep it in the ground. Israel has been sitting on its gas for a long time, putting all sorts of vetoes towards exporting that gas. Of course, the best thing would be exporting it in the region, but there again, you know, conflict, and there is no way to overcome this. So I'm sorry, you know, Egypt is different because, of course, they need the gas. So the big discoveries in Egypt will be utilized for Egyptian consumption. That's at least for as long as Egypt can pay a decent price to the companies to produce that gas, which might not be for a long time because there as well the economic situation is going to be very problematic. But, you know, there you have a going hypothesis, a valid hypothesis. So I don't think much will change, honestly.
They are unlucky, especially with Corona. Thank you, Dr. Saif. Would coronavirus crisis have an impact on redirecting of investments, trade, movement, and supply chains at the level of both states and big companies? And how would globalization be affected by the ongoing crisis?
Well, that is, I think already Dr. Hani has eloquently alluded to, you know, changing and reducing what we call the supply chain, or whatever name we want to give to the word of level of global trade and the openness. Just one step back, and this has been sort of the trends since the late 60s, you know, establishment of World Trade Organization, the multilateral institutions like the World Bank and the IMF, and the several either international multilateral institutions that have been created basically to sort of promote openness and deregulation, trade openness, and now there is a structure based on that, in like 5 decades of persistent effort and work that has been introduced in the respective countries that we have in mind, that have led to where we are today. And now, when there is one drop in the level of international trade, we said there is like a slowdown in that. But I like the notion of reducing unnecessary consumption, because that is not necessarily something bad. Actually, that is there is a revisiting of this. So yes, I think a lot of countries are now would appreciate more their agricultural sector. A lot of countries would appreciate more their sort of homegrown product and domestic manufacturing sector, and they could put aside for a while the issue of efficiency, the quality, etc. That is, for sometimes that was uncompromisable somehow. I mean, that was like taboo. You don't talk about it. It's a consumer that is in behind. Now, the inward looking is something that is gaining momentum. The agricultural sector that has been weak in most of for example, our region, it's now being revisited and rethought that we should probably focus more in this and that the word protectionism, actually, it's not a bad word. It actually started with this trends in the US and other countries, that as we want to come America first, or the Europeans' common agricultural policy, or other policies that's been adopted in these countries. And I think we're much more familiar with the word and amenable and receptive to the word protection of domestic interest, out of which you identify sectors, and you identify certain activities that you need to protect, because now it becomes the dichotomy now, that is its existence, survival versus openness, and versus how we are going to cope with this. And for good, for bad, COVID-19 has proven that when you have some solid domestic base in either pharmaceutical industry or in agricultural or in civil manufacturing, then you're much more resilient than other countries that hasn't been sort of or have been very much reliant on everything that is coming from outside. So, however, reversing this trend is going to take really long period of time. It's not as easy. It's not like you're switching on and off in this. You have to reverse mentality. You have to read the mindset. You have to reverse the regulations. You have to rethink the infrastructure. So many things that has to be taken. Whether we're going to witness a trend in that direction, I think we're beginning to witness that, but that will take, I think, fairly long. It will take a long period of time. It's a long shot before we can really reverse that sort of normal. If we talk to talk about the new normal or the abnormal, then it will take some time for that.
You are absolutely right. Changing the priorities now. Dr. Hani, based on your expertise on China, so this is a question for you. What would be the potential impact of the coronavirus crisis on the future of China's Belt and Road Initiative?
Okay, so I think it's a little early to tell what Chinese thinking is about approaching this, because part of it is going to be colored by the experience of the countries that they have focused on in the BRI and how it's going to evolve. So far, we have a few things that we already know. Chinese economy has contracted by 6.8%, the GDP in the first quarter of this year, which is the biggest decline it has experienced in over 30 years. Chinese economy usually contracts or slows down in the first quarter because it happened to coincide with what the Chinese call the Spring Festival, which is Chinese New Year, in which for a 2-week period, most businesses, governments, and activities come to a halt, and people take vacation, visiting families, and going through certain rituals. So that basically takes about 10 to 15% of the quarter, in which there's quite a bit of slowdown. But this decline is unprecedented. It was also interesting that the Chinese economy, which is now at about 70 to 75% capacity, has experienced a growth in just about every sector except for exports. In the month of April, exports declined, even though the economic activities in April were higher than they were in March. So that gives you a sense of where their thinking is and how trade issues are likely to take place. The one thing they have noticed, however, is that despite the fact that exports have actually declined in the first quarter and into April, trade and exports to surrounding countries that are part of the BRI have actually increased by 3.2% in the first 4 months of the year. So that may give us a hint as to where the focus is likely to be and where they're headed. Whether that is going to lead them to focus much more on countries in which they are more surrounded with and invest into those countries in the hope of expanding and tightening trade and investment relationship, or whether they will face economic shortages that they will and financial issues that they will move to reduce that. I don't know. I personally don't think so. I think for now they will concentrate on the surrounding countries with which trade has been actually growing as compared to contracting. And usually when there's something winning, you go with it until it stops.
Thank you, Hani. Giacomo, how can influential powers in the global order and in other sub-regional orders strike a balance between managing their own internal crisis resultant from the coronavirus pandemic and managing their foreign influence?
Yes, I think in terms of foreign interests, there is going to be some increasing tendency towards isolationism. I think what we have seen is, in the case of the United States, a very clear tendency towards isolationism, and specifically a very clear tendency to get out of the Middle East and North Africa, because I think that's #1 point. And in Europe, there is huge frustration about the region as well, because we don't seem to be able to have any positive influence, and there is therefore a desire to back out of it. There is profound disappointment towards Russia and Putin, and the issue of Ukraine is not resolved. The Europeans are not yet accepting the occupation of Crimea. The Europeans will not devote a penny to the reconstruction of Syria for as long as Bashar is in power, and I can go on. You know, the only thing that matters for Europe today is the issue of migration. We don't want hundreds of thousands of people from the Middle East and North Africa or from sub-Saharan Africa coming into Europe. We are not, the public opinion is not ready to accept it. Although there is a significant component of the elite that argues that this is positive for our economies. Nevertheless, you know, Frau Merkel has been severely touched by what she decided to do in '95. It's unfortunate, in my opinion, it's unfortunate, but it's a political fact, and this will not be repeated. So I think the attitude is that there is very little to be gained out of active involvement in international affairs beyond the immediate interest, which is probably going to be a continuation of policies towards sub-Saharan Africa that I see, but even towards Latin America. We just recently signed a free trade agreement with the Mercosur countries, and we have to deal with Bolsonaro. I mean, in Brazil, to the European public opinion, every day, we have stories on the newscast, on TV, about the stupid things that Bolsonaro says or does. And so, it's not something that can be made attractive. No European politician will engage itself into improving relations with Brazil at the moment until that man is around. So that's the way it is.
Yes, Giacomo, but I think there is still European involvement in some kind of conflicts. We'll see Italy and France, and they are in Libya. So this is the pandemic did not prevent. In this pandemic, there are many opportunities. Look to Turkey, look to Iran, look to everybody is searching opportunities during this pandemic also.
Well, I think you're right. There has been a conflict, a disagreement between Italy and France on the Libyan issue. And because we want to make sure that there are good relations between Italy and France, that's one good reason why we tend to play it down and not make a big fuss out of this. Of course, we are concerned about Libya. There is no way we cannot be concerned. It's so close, and it has an immediate impact on us, especially on Italy. But we have tried to support the United Nations effort and this has not been I think I personally think it is very fortunate that people are not trying to find compromises, that people are still trying to find a military solution to the conflict, which is not possible. And so, any country that is supporting or betting on a military solution in Libya is wrong. And, but that's true, for Libya, it's true for Iraq, for Syria, for Yemen, you name it. I mean, unfortunately, of this case.
It's everywhere. Thank you, Giacomo. I will move to Dr. Saif. Dr. Saif, what are the implications of the coronavirus crisis on the economies of the Middle Eastern countries? And how would this reflect on the regional geostrategic environment in the aftermath of the coronavirus crisis?
With the middle, I guess, of this pandemic and COVID, the saga is still going on. We're not done yet. So when we talk about the implication and translate that into contraction of the economies of the MENA region, this afternoon, actually, I received an email from it's a notification that is the new MENA region or the economic outlook of the MENA region had just came out, actually, literally just like 1 or 2 hours ago. It's this updated version that came out. But anyway, I mean, now who is doing better than others is who is going to contract less than others. I mean, I concur with Dr. Hani when he said that there is no clear winner. It's relative. It means how less devastated you are, either as a country or as a sector, in terms of facing this pandemic. But to talk about an absolute winner in terms of the traditional way of analyzing the loser winner, I would agree that everybody is losing. So the implication, look at our unemployment figure, look at our poverty, the middle class. I mean, when we analyze, actually, it's worth analyzing this and looking at it as those who are. Couple of things came to mind at once, is that you have really vulnerable groups, and these vulnerable groups, not only in terms of the level of income, but also in terms of the working conditions they are living. You have, like, in countries like Egypt, like Jordan, like, not to talk about the stricken war countries, the informal economy is huge, and they are extremely exposed to what is happening, actually, because they are really making their daily livings. However, now that has been either because of the lockdown, because of the contraction, or because of any other reasons, they are unable to access their work, they are unable to make that daily substance. So therefore, they are very vulnerable, and I think a lot of countries are trying to cover for that. So that is something that it ought to be really contemplated. Probably while we're thinking about the future, it's about what its government has been doing for all these years in terms of tackling such an issue. Youth unemployment is one of the highest in the region. Female participation in the labor market, one of the lowest globally. That is in the non-oil countries. In the oil countries, I mean, the reduction of oil revenue would definitely also influence the dynamics of growth, and would create also, I think, different dynamics. And we started to witness this new, I think it was today or yesterday, when Saudis has imposed VAT, and also the reconstruct of the labor market in some of the Gulf economies. However, now, even with the modest growth rate that has been registered in the region, unemployment was high. Those people clustered just above poverty lines were immense in terms of numbers, in terms of figures, and yet now we're witnessing a contraction. So this would definitely translate into the government-citizens relation in a way, but also how countries are looking at each other, and whether any form of cooperation would help them overcome these challenges. Because now, again, a single country, a country alone, no matter the size of this country is, alone, they cannot handle the magnitude of the crisis and overcome the serious structural challenges that actually struck services. Look, this is different, right? And maybe just one word. In 2008, the last financial crisis, it almost took 2 years to take full effects on the people. This is almost 3 months that all this devastation that took place started with decision, sort of administrative decision on the supply side, which is unprecedented except in the wartime, into now the demand side, with huge degree of ambiguity, uncertainty, unpredictability about what's coming next. So whoever now has some savings or resources, I think they would clinch to that until at least they can decide what to do next. And that, unfortunately, why the behavior, and I've mentioned this, the consumer behavior and the investors' behavior actually has to be really, they need some special kind of assurance before they can re-engage and reignite the economies in the respective countries.
Thank you, Dr. Sef. We will move, if you allow me, because we have, I think, around 5 minutes. We'll move to a question from the audience. And there's a question for Dr. Findakli. It is for the, since was here.
I'm afraid we're losing Dr. Hani, Ibtisam.
We lost him?
I cannot see him. I don't know. You can ask, but...
I see. Yeah, I don't see him as well.
No, I don't see him, no.
I don't see him as well.
But
Okay.
maybe we can answer the question nevertheless.
On his
It's
Tell
behalf.
us which
No,
the
no, no.
question is.
There are many. There are around 40 questions we are having. I'm trying just to pick something we did not raise it through Q&A with you. That the, what they are saying, are there any new negative trends in the MENA states' economies right now? What are these trends? Would you like to answer, Abu Butras?
Yes, I would like to say something in this respect. I think obviously there is now a problem with the future of oil, the oil price, and therefore the economic stability in the region. What is important is that this problem is not new. It has been now some time that the future of oil is under question. Okay, there is a question on the future of oil because the world is moving towards decarbonization. It's moving towards a different system of energy. And in this context, the countries in the region, the major oil producers and exporters, can take two possibilities. Either, you know, try and export as much oil as they can in the short run and devote the money to diversifying in a direction away from oil, or try to defend their role as producers of oil by integrating upstream and downstream from the oil industry and decarbonizing the oil industry itself. I believe, I am convinced that the second solution is the right one. Countries should, and this experience demonstrates, you know, countries that have invested heavily in tourism, in aviation, in finance, are, you know, at the moment in serious difficulty because these are extremely fragile sectors. They can go very well, but they can go very badly. So I don't think this is a valid long-term diversification strategy. The valid long-term diversification strategy is based on what your resources are, and so based on transforming oil and gas into something different and dealing with its industry in order to make it acceptable in a world that it is decarbonizing. We know what needs to be done. It requires a lot of investment. It requires foresight and courage. And this is something that the region needs today. So I think, you know, there are two important ingredients in this story. One is make peace, not war, and the other is invest on what you have.
Hard recipe, very difficult.
Very difficult. I wish we could take all the rulers, all the political responsible people and put them in a hotel and tell them, you know, you're not going to get out of here until you have signed a peace agreement for each and every one of the conflicts in the region. That's what we need.
Thank you. Let's take another question. Well, is localization of supply chain possible, and to what level, Dr. This is from Muhammad Baharoun. Dr. Saif, is localization of
supply chain, I think I alluded to this throughout the discussion, that is definitely there is this growing trend in terms of inward looking. There is growing trend in legitimizing, providing your domestic industries or production a kind of subsidies, or protection. That is like a taboo that was forbidden, and that's still forbidden under the current WTO rule or under the current global trend in terms of openness, competition, and also global integration of the supply chain. Now, questions since the eruption of coronavirus have been asked about, do we really need that all long supply chain in order to make a product or in order to consume? And they started, why do I have to buy a shirt that is made in Bangladesh, shipped to other countries, transported to other countries? Do we need that? These are the kind of questions that actually...
Dr. Ibrahim, we are getting a warn that our streaming is going to be finished. Thank you for this rich discussion. Thank you very much. Hani, we lost you, but you came back, thanks God. But we are, we're about to leave. Good to see you. We already consumed our time, and thank you very much for all of you. I believe this was a fantastic discussion, and like to have you again. And of course, we would like, of course, to exit this environment of coronavirus and of quarantine and see you in a better situation. But thank you all for accepting the invitation, for your comments, and for all what you add to this topic. And we hope all you stay healthy and safe. Thank you very much. Thank
you, Ibtisam. I have to apologize for the fact that I was dropped out in the last 10 minutes for technology reasons, but it was terrific, and thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Ibtisam.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.